Welcome back to A Faith That Will Not Fail. I'm Rustin.
I'm Mike.
I'm Tammy.
And we are so glad that you're joining us on this podcast devotional experience as we seek to read this book together and practice the daily practices that Michelle Couchette offers to us. Again, this week we're in the difficult practice of relinquishment and letting go. And day 3 is about living an open-handed life.
So on page 89, she says, we hold on to Jesus most of all. When we loosen our grip on lesser loves, we discover a new core strength. So I was left asking, what are we gripping onto? And again, that's something for me as a control freak. I could name 50 things every day that I'm holding on to. And so I think this relinquishment practice, as we've talked about yesterday a little bit, was, it's not a one-time thing. We need to keep stretching this muscle. And so it might be today I'm holding tight onto this thing. And then the next day, maybe I'm not as good, or maybe I recognize yesterday I really held on tight to that. God help me in today to let that go a little bit more and have some trust.
Yeah. And so oftentimes the things that I'm holding on tight one day are not the things that I'm holding on tight to the next day.
Yep.
Right. So how do we put a practice into our beings of, God, please show me today what I'm holding on too tightly to. Even that, God, make me more aware, right? I think about the prayer of, I have faith, but help me in my
unbelief. Yeah.
Totally. In the introduction of the book, I really liked that Couchette said that, prayer and scripture, she's not going to name those as separate practices of these 10, that they're just built in. And for me, a reminder today is, I need to pray this relinquishment prayer throughout the day. It's a practice. We're ongoing here.
I love her analogy. Believe it or not, I used to work out. And so it's surprising. The idea of the new method of resistance workout she was trying to, right? And the idea of holding a pose for longer than supposed to in order to build those long, I think they're the short muscle fibers, right? And, it's funny that when we pay attention, that's when we can realize that if we're holding on or not holding on, right? It's like, I remember driving someplace, and just get in that zone where you're driving, and then all of a sudden, my hands feel a little weird, and I open them up. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just gripping.
You notice it in your body. I notice it in my jaw, and if I'm really holding on to something, I clench my teeth.
Yeah. And I think, it's just this awareness, right? She talks about how the awareness for her of okay, this is a different type of workout. But for us, taking that moment to pause and just to feel, are we gripping tightly to something that we shouldn't? Are we living open-handedly, right?
Yeah, maybe even do we have a body cue that we notice that if we see that in ourselves, we need to kind of take a breath and let go and release.
Do we even know our body well enough to do that, right? I think that's a starting space for many of us as
we're praying today's prayer.
Tapping into our body and what that means. For me, the piece that was most meaningful in this, and it's, we all have these memory verses, or most of us have memory verses that we learned as kids. And for me, one of the very first memory verses I learned was trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight.
Proverbs 3, 5, and 6.
I hadn't thought about that verse in a long time. And when I was reading it in her work, thinking through that as a process, okay, what does it look like to trust the Lord with all my heart? Mm-hmm. What does it look like to not lean on my own understanding? Where am I trying to hold my understanding? In all my ways acknowledge him, and then my path will be straight, right? That's this kind of threefold pattern of how we live into doing this open-handed living and letting go and trusting our bodies to tell us when things are off.
I love that 10,000 or 5,000 foot view of yourself too. Okay, if I look at myself, what does that look like in those 3 places?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How meta.
So for our 5-minute faith builder today, do you want to tell us about that, Tammy?
Today we're going to be praying Brother Lawrence's prayer. My God, I am all yours. Do what you will with me. And repeat this 5 times slowly. And again, if you need to pray that, and as you're praying that, kind of look at yourself and notice and lean into the places where you might not be doing that. And where do you need to live more open-handedly?
And in the comments section, I encourage you to write down maybe one thing that you can maybe let go and give to God today. And so we'd love to pray with you.
See you tomorrow.